Good morning, everyone. I'm Janet B., recovered from compulsive eating and bulimia. Happy to be here with you today. Really cool chapter today. We're going to talk about, well, I'm going to talk about the chapter A Vision for You that starts on page 151. There's a lot of really cool stuff here. So if you have your big book, can open to page 151 and look at that title, A Vision for You, like their vision for us. So this chapter is largely about the fellowship, which is important and wonderful, and that was part of their vision. But again, that was not the solution. They were really clear that the solution is a spiritual experience, which we get as a result of these steps. But who wants to have a spiritual experience and live in a vacuum all by ourselves? That would be just kind of boring and lonely. So they are talking about this wonderful fellowship we can have. So they start out saying for most normal folks, drinking or let's say overeating means this, that, and the other. Well, I'm not normal. And it never meant that for me, right? It says it means release from care, boredom, and worry. We crave release from these things. And at first, binging gives that to us. But I need to learn how to be okay. Like if I'm bored, if I've got cares and worries going on, I need a way to deal with those things. And this program, right, it teaches us that. It teaches us how to do fear inventories. It teaches us that we need to be helping other people. So if we're through the steps and we're sponsoring a bunch of people, we are not going to be bored, right? A beautiful promise they have. And they tell us that once we're like stuck in this illness, there was an insistent yearning to enjoy life as we once did. Spoiler alert, we will never be able to enjoy life as we once did. I will never be able to be like my my young adult daughter, who if she has a bad day, maybe can eat a pint of ice cream and then the next day she cuts back and she's fine. I will never be able to enjoy life that way. And it says we also have a heartbreaking obsession that some new miracle of control, right? That's what we want. We want a miracle, but the miracle of control, that I will be able to eat as much as I want and get away with it, not gain weight and not hate myself tomorrow. And they say there is always one more attempt and one more failure. And of course, that's what they talk about on page 30. The great obsession is that one day, somehow, someday, he will control and enjoy his drinking. And they say that's a delusion, an insane thought. And then they tell us about this downward spiral. What happens to us? We withdrew from society, from life itself. We became subjects of king alcohol. Isn't that horrible? I mean, you imagine this like king food that says you're going to do this on this day, this amount of food, and there's nothing you can do about it. That's what happens to us. I mean, they tell us what happens. The chilling vapor that is loneliness settled down, thickened, becoming ever blacker, right? So just like recovery is progressive, and as we get more recovered, we get more happiness, more joy, and more freedom. The illness is progressive. The loneliness is progressive. And that drive to get rid of the loneliness is so strong. And they say sometimes we sought out sordid places. I know I did that. You know, I just like would go out with men who were totally inappropriate. Guys, this was before I got married. And I just like anything to not be lonely. And it says, yeah, okay, we felt better for a while. Then the awful awakening, like the opposite of a spiritual experience, oblivion, terror, bewilderment, frustration, despair. That is our life in the illness. On top of page 152, they say, sometimes someone's dry and says, I'm fine. And they say, yeah, he's like a boy whistling in the dark to keep up his spirits. Inwardly, he would give anything to take half a dozen drinks and get away with them. He will presently try the old game again, for he isn't happy about his sobriety. So we need to ask ourselves, am I secretly hoping that once I lose all the weight, I'll be able to eat a gallon of ice cream every now and then and get away with it? And they say no. And they say he isn't happy about his sobriety. Why? Because it's like you take a glass and you empty it, but you have to fill it with something else. We need to be happy about our sobriety. We need to replace the binging with something else. And they say, we've shown how we got out from under. So, what they are talking about there is how they stopped drinking, how they stopped eating compulsively, work the 12 steps, and have a spiritual experience. And they say, okay, I'm willing. But is life going to be stupid, boring, and glum like some righteous people I see? Guys, God never meant for us to recover in a vacuum, work these 12 steps, and then say, okay, I'm not binging, but the only thing I can replace it with is Netflix to zone out on. No, that is not what we are supposed to do. It says, I know I must get along without liquor, but how can I? Have you a sufficient substitute? And they say, yes, and it's more, even better than what you had before. It is a fellowship in Alcoholics Anonymous. So remember, that's a substitute for like a boring life. It is not the solution. If we try to recover with just the fellowship, we will not recover because our problem is lack of power. The fellowship can give me love, right? Can give me friendship. It cannot give me power. You all might love me. You cannot give one single drop of your power to me. So they say, yes, there's a substitute, a fellowship in or OA. There you will find release from care, boredom, and worry, right? The three things that led us to drink, or three of the things that led us to drink. Your imagination will be fired. Life will mean something at last. And then look at this most beautiful promise. The most satisfactory years of your existence lie ahead. So no matter how old you are or how young you are, they are saying the best is yet to come. So we don't have to yearn for, oh, the good old days when, I was young and I could run 2 miles without my knees creaking. No, 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 no. The best is yet to come. And they say, okay, how? How's this going to happen? They say, you are going to meet these new friends in your community. And I just want to put a plug in. I know this is a Zoom meeting. We have people from all over the world, and it is wonderful. But if I get a flat tire, Rita over in the UK is not going to come over and give me a ride. We need a local fellowship. So, what I recommend is that go where you need to get recovered, to get the good information. And when you're recovered, go to one meeting a week locally so you can share this locally. And they say, you're going to meet these new friends in your own community. Near you, alcoholics, compulsive eaters are dying helplessly like people in a sinking ship. And think of that image, like the people and I think this is a great analogy. The people in the Titanic, a sinking ship, knew that they were doomed, but that didn't save them. They needed to be rescued. So we can know that we're doomed, right? I can't stop binging. I'm a subject of king food, but that alone doesn't do it. We need to be rescued. But they're talking here about the fellowship, right? Y'all are going to be rescued. We're going to be rescued. We're going to escape disaster together. And then page 153, commence shoulder to shoulder your common journey. Being rescued from disaster is only a beginning. That's just the start. It says, then once you're rescued and you're working with others, you will know what it means to give of yourself that others may survive and rediscover life. So give of myself. That means giving of my time, my energy to other people so that they may survive and rediscover life. So if I'm not giving of myself, right? If I'm watching as much Netflix as I want to, and by the way, my just fun fact, my husband started a second career as a handyman. His name is Fred Buckles. And one of his clients yesterday told him that there's this show from the UK called Call the Midwife, and the handyman's name was Fred Buckle. So we started watching it. There's 14 seasons of it. If I watched all those 14 seasons in a month, I am not giving of myself. But my husband thought it was really cool that there was a handyman with the same name as he had. Just we have an S at the end of our name. So that was just pretty cool. But I cannot be watching all the Netflix I want. I need to give of myself. That means sacrifice my time. And look what we get to do for others. We help others survive, like otherwise they might be dead, and rediscover life. And it says, you will learn the full meaning of love thy neighbor as thyself, the antidote to self-centeredness. Love thy neighbor as thyself. And we may have all learned that in Sunday school or something, but we only really learn it by doing it, by giving of ourselves so that others may survive and rediscover life. And they say, well, how can this be? How can, all of us who were kind of train wrecks become happy, respected, and useful? How do we do that? And they say the practical answer is these things have happened to us, right? These guys were skid row alcoholics. And it says it can happen to you. Two requirements. Should you wish them above all else? So really want this, right? If you want what we have. And two, be willing to make use of our experience. Be willing to go to any lengths to get it. It says, we are sure they will come. The age of miracles is still with us. Okay, that is probably the most beautiful promise in the whole big book. So when we think of miracles, we may think of things like Moses parting the Red Sea or Jesus coming off the cross, things like that. But they say the age of miracles is still with us. But of course, we were people who were dead inside, and now we're not. The fact that I am walking around and not throwing up 6 times a day, and that I'm able to be useful, that's a miracle. Nothing short of a miracle could have saved me. The age of miracles is still with us. And they say our hope is that when people see this book, they'll realize that they can recover and help others find a way out. And just fun fact, that was the original idea for the title of the big book, A Way Out. But there were 12 other books with that name. So it came to be called Alcoholics Anonymous. The other name they were considering was the James Society, because so much of this book is based on the book of James in the Bible. So they say, okay, in the chapter Working with Others, you gathered an idea of how we approach and aid others to health. And so you want to know more. So we're going to tell you how this fellowship got started, because maybe it will inspire you. So they talk about Bill Wilson, page 153 to the top of 154. He had traveled to another city, and this is how he was. He was newly sober. The proceeding he went there for wound up in a lawsuit. There was hard feeling and controversy. He was bitterly discouraged, away from home, discredited, almost broke, and he was physically weak and newly sober. But remember, when Bill Wilson first got sober and he's lying in the hospital, remember back in Bill's story, he said, the thought came to me that there were many alcoholics who I could help, and maybe they could help others. So already he was looking to do God's will. So here he is in this hotel away from home, and there's a bar, and he's thinking, let me go in, otherwise I may be lonely this weekend. I don't know why he couldn't just go home right away, but for some reason he had to stay. And he said, I'd be lonely, right? We cannot stand being lonely. And then he says, okay, maybe I'll just go in the bar and not have a drink, but just have a ginger ale. I mean, that's like us going into a Haagen-Dazs, and getting a bottle of water. And he says, oh, maybe I can have 3 drinks, right? Maybe I can have just 1 scoop of ice cream. And it's like, no, I'm on thin ice. And then he walked away. He took action. So again, we can't just turn away from something. We have to turn toward something. And he turned to a church directory that was in the hotel. And he thought about it. What am I going to do? And he said, you know what? I had that thought before to help other alcoholics. Let me call and see if I can find someone. And it says his sanity returned and he thanked God. How often do I thank God? Do we thank God during the day, right? For all the good things, for the intuitive thoughts we get, for the provision he makes. His sanity returned and he thanked God. He went to that church directory, and as I understand it, there were six churches, six listings. He had to call all six until he got someone. And he said, basically, I'm in town. I'm a recovered alcoholic. I need a drunk to help. Do you know anyone? And he said, go see Henrietta Seiberling. I think she helps drunks. And in 2 weeks, I'll kind of go over this a little more in depth. But there he was, and he met Dr. Bob. Dr. Bob listened to him and said, a spiritual experience was absolutely necessary, right? He agreed. He said, but the price seemed high. What's my too high a price that I'm not willing to pay? Now, again, we want to be sane about this. One time I was talking to a woman and she said, I'm not willing to divorce my husband. I'm like, is anyone telling you to divorce your husband? Is your husband like abusive to you? No, my marriage is good. I'm not willing to divorce him. I'm like, no one is telling you to divorce your husband. Okay. But what wasn't Bob willing to do? He wasn't willing to go around to the people he knew and tell them that he had an alcohol problem. Said he would do anything but that. So we all need to think, what's my but that I'm not willing to do? So he got better for a little while, and then he got drunk again. And bottom of page 155, it says, he saw he would have to face his problems squarely, that God might give him mastery. So willingness, which was backed up by action. I have a quote in my big book. I don't remember where I heard it. Your feet show what you believe. My actions show what my faith is more than my words really do. And it says June 10th, 1935, that's when he took the bull by the horns, which meant he really did it. And he set out and told those he feared what his trouble had been. And he had not had a drink since. So he and Bill, now he's recovered. Bill had stayed in the town, and it says, I'm on page 156 in the middle. Life was not easy. Plenty of difficulties presented themselves. So just because we work these steps doesn't mean we're going to get the perfect job, the perfect husband. Our kids are going to listen to us all the time. No, there's still difficulties. And they saw they must keep spiritually active so that they could get through all this. So what did they do? They called the head nurse of a local hospital. They explained their need and said, do you have anyone we can help? And she said, oh, yes, we've got a corker. I have no idea what a corker means, but I guess that means a real hardcore alcoholic. He's just beaten up a couple of nurses, goes off his head completely when he's drinking. He's a lawyer. He was once a well-known lawyer, but we have him strapped down tight. So this was a bad case. And they said, yeah, it didn't really seem too promising. Page 157, the use of spiritual principles in such cases was not so well understood as it is now. They said, put him in a private room, we'll be down. 2 days later, this guy stared glassily at them and said, who are you? And why this private room? I was always in a ward before. So I want to talk about something here. Why did they wait 2 days to go? Okay, so first, they didn't leave him without any help. They had him put in a private room where he would have support. And this is a guy who was beating people up, had to be strapped down. He had to be detoxed. If they had talked to him before that, he would not have known what they were talking about. This does not mean that if someone comes up and asks us for help, we tell them to go off and get 2 days before we will talk to them. That is not true. If the founders of AA had wanted that, they would have put those directions in the chapter working with others, where they are very specific about what we need to do. And see, even 2 days later, he's staring glassily at them. It took that long for him to be detoxed so that they could have a conversation with him. That's not generally how it is with compulsive eaters. There's this book works in most ways. There's a couple ways where it doesn't. I recall in the chapter, The Family Afterwards, it says sometimes you give someone candy. We don't give people candy. 2 days, it generally does not take 2 days until we're coherent. I looked it up once. If someone's all like, sugared up, how long does it take until they can think straight? 2 hours. 2 hours. It's the very rare person who cannot think straight for 2 days. So I want to be really clear about that because I've heard of people telling people, go get 2 days and then come back and we'll start. Well, how am I going to get 2 days if I don't have power? Some people can do 2 days on willpower. I couldn't. There were many times I couldn't even make it to work without eating compulsively. Okay, so we want to be really clear and we don't want to just desert people and say, call me when you have 48 hours. We don't want to really shirk our responsibilities. That early time of stopping, that's when people need us the most. So again, we give them lots of phone numbers. We give them fellowship. We give them support. We have them start praying. And if they're close to us, maybe we ask them to stay at our house. I've asked people, do you want to come stay at my house for a couple of days? So we do everything we can. Okay, so back to this guy, AA number 3. He's like, who are you? And they said, we're giving you a treatment for alcoholism. And it says, hopelessness was written as his face. And he says, that's no use. Nothing would fix me. The last 3 times I got drunk on the way home from here. So this guy clearly couldn't get 2 days on his own. He got drunk as soon as he got out of the hospital. That's so sad, right? Imagine you go for treatment and you can't even make it home from the hospital. He was hopeless. And what did they do for an hour? They told him about their own drinking experiences to get an identification. He said, that's me, I drink like that. He was hopeless, and they spent an hour getting an identification, and only then did they talk about the solution when the guy felt hopeless. So they told him how alcohol deteriorates the body, warps the mind, talked about the mental state preceding the first drink. And if you want to know, we have a one-page flyer on our website called The Broken Bridge that details exactly the mental state that precedes the first drink. And so he said, that's me. I understand, but I don't know what good it'll do. From what you tell me, I now know more than ever that I can't stop. Well, that means they were successful, right? When we're talking to someone, we want them to feel hopeless, like, oh my gosh, now you've told me I really can't stop. My bridge is broken. I am hopeless. And then only when he felt hopeless did they talk about their spiritual experience and the course of action they carried out. Spiritual experience, right? They surrendered their life to God, tried to do what they think God wanted. Course of action, clear away the wreckage of their past and try to help others. And the guy says, very interesting, page 158, I've prayed to God on hangover mornings and sworn that I'd never touch another drop, but by 9 o'clock, I'd be boiled as an owl. Okay, begging doesn't help. Begging isn't surrender. He swore that he'd never touch another drop. Well, that's trying to do it on his own power, and that doesn't work either, right? Begging isn't the same as obedience. Remember, our book says either God is everything or else he is nothing. Basically, we surrender our lives to God or it's if we surrendered nothing. I can't give God my food plan and cheat on my taxes. And then the next day, he's thinking. We always want to give people time to think. He said, maybe you're right. God ought to be able to do anything. So desperation plus correct information sets the stage for success. He said, God ought to be able to do anything. He sure didn't do anything for me when I was trying to fight this booze by myself. On the third day, look how quickly they worked. The lawyer gave his life, so not just his alcohol, his whole life to the care and direction of his creator. I can't expect God to take care of me if I'm not willing to take direction, right? Care and direction of his creator. And said he was perfectly willing to do anything necessary. Here's another quote I have. This one came from Herb K. Willingness unlocks the door to grace. And I've seen that over and over. As soon as someone says, I'm willing to go to any lengths and starts doing it, suddenly she gets the grace to not have to binge anymore. Willingness unlocks the door to grace. And his wife came in, and already she saw something different about her husband. He had begun to have a spiritual experience. He gave his life to God, and that allowed God to come in and start that renovation job on his heart. I guess God is the ultimate handyman, right? Doing a renovation job on his heart. And he says, okay, he left the hospital, he entered a political race, often staying up all night. He lost the race, but he had found God. And in finding God, he had found himself, right? There's such a quest, like, I need to find myself. No, they're saying we find God. And when we find God, we find ourselves. So now there's three of them because this guy also, he never drank again. And his story is called Alcoholics Anonymous #3. And it's a beautiful story. I'd encourage everyone to read. So there's the three of them, and they say, we have to give to others what we found, or we will be sunk. So after several failures, a fourth one turned up. His parents couldn't help him. They were very religious. They couldn't understand. So page 159, they put this guy in the hospital. The three of them went to visit him, and he said, the way you put the spiritual stuff makes sense. I'm ready to do business. I guess the old folks were ready after all. So one more was added to the fellowship. And again, what's the way they put this spiritual stuff? And I think the best example of that is on page 215, Our Southern Friend, where this is the story of the minister's son, where he goes into the room of another patient in the asylum who seems to be doing okay and says, I have to ask you a question. How does prayer fit into this thing? And he says, well, you've probably tried praying like I have. When you've been in a jam, you said, God, please do this or that. And if it turned out your way, that was the last of it. And if it didn't, you said, there isn't any God, or he hasn't done anything for me. Is that right? And isn't that how a lot of us used God, how we thought spirituality worked, right? We treated God as our cosmic genie. And the guy said, this isn't the way. This is his spiritual approach. The thing I do is to say, God, here I am, and here are all my troubles. I've made a mess of things and can't do anything about it. You take me and all my troubles and do anything you want with me. That, I think, is the spiritual approach that they gave him, right? And then as we're waiting for God to do that, we just do everything that we think God would probably want us to do, knowing that we'll likely make mistakes, but that God will forgive us. Okay, so they recover. This guy recovers, and they say, we have to help still more if we would remain sober. But they say that motive became secondary. It was transcended by the happiness they found in giving themselves for others. So that motive starts out primary. The primary motive at the beginning is, I need to do this so that I stay sober. And they say, but after a while, that motive is number two. It's not the primary motive. Well, how come? How does that change? Remember, when we have a spiritual experience, God rewires our hearts so that our priorities become more like His priorities, that we love like God loves. And so here it is. There, now the number one motive is it makes me happy to help others. Makes me really happy. And I think people who've worked this program have found this. We first start sponsoring because we have to, and then it's really fun. It's really fun if we're working with people who are willing to do the work. If we're trying to sponsor someone who is not willing to go to any length, it's not fun, but we're not supposed to be sponsoring those people anyway. So they say they shared their homes, their slender resources. They gladly devoted their spare hours to others. And they say a year and 6 months later, these three had succeeded with seven more. That's not a large number, right? In 18 months, three people, only seven successes. But I'm not responsible for the number of successes I have. That's God's responsibility. I'm only responsible for trying to carry this message with love and giving accurate information. And they say these people were getting together. Now there were more of them, constantly thinking about how they might present their discovery to some newcomer. So we use our creativity to think, how can we help others? And they say there was one meeting now, page 160, to be attended by anyone or everyone interested in a spiritual way of life. There's fellowship, sociability, and the prime object to provide a time and place where new people might bring their problems. Like healthy meetings are solution entered, oriented, and allow people to bring their problems. That's why we always take questions at the end of all Recovery Jam meetings. So here they are, they're thinking, like they're brainstorming, how can we help people? How can we help someone who stumbles next? So that's really interesting. They didn't say, okay, when next he stumbles, we're done. We've done our job. We're washing our hands of him. They're saying, no, is there something we haven't tried? Is there a different approach? Is there a way we can present it that's better? They didn't just write off hard cases. If people had written off hard cases, I would not be here today. And then they start talk about meetings, and they say what meetings should have the very practical approach to his problem. So it's like, here's what we do to recover. The absence of intolerance of any kind. We don't care what your politics are, what your religion is, what your nationality is, anything like that. The informality, the genuine democracy. No one's better than the next person. I just might have got on the bus a couple stops before the next guy. Doesn't make me one bit more spiritual, one bit better. The uncanny understanding which these people had were irresistible, right? Irresistible. That's what a meeting's supposed to be. Page 161. People leave there thinking, what can I do for someone else? And this is so pretty. Page 161, first paragraph. They knew they had a host of new friends. It seemed they had known these strangers always. They had seen miracles, and one was to come to them. What a beautiful promise. We do this work, we'll have a miracle. They had visioned the great reality, their loving and all-powerful creator, right? For someone who doesn't believe in God or thinks God is, a bad guy, look at this. Look at how they describe God. All loving, all powerful, our creator. And he's recreating us. He didn't just create the world in 6 days and he's like watching the midwife calls for eternity. He's recreating us. And again, a beautiful quote by Herb K. When we see the great reality, the mosquitoes of life don't bother us so much. If we know that like God's alive and well and working in my life to change me so that I can be a nicer person and help others, am I really going to care if someone cuts me off in traffic? Not so much. And they say, okay, alcoholics are being attracted from near and far. If we're living this way of life, it's inevitable that people are going to be attracted to us. And they say, but life in AA is more than attending meetings, visiting hospitals, cleaning up old scrapes. Um, these are everyday occurrences. And they say no one is too discredited or has sunk too low to be welcome if he means business. So someone needs to mean business. What does that mean? They're willing to go to any lengths to have a spiritual experience. They say we laugh about social distinctions, petty rivalries, and jealousies, being wrecked in the same vessel, being restored and united under one God, with our hearts and minds attuned to the welfare of others. The things which matter so much to some people don't matter so much to us anymore. How could they? When I'm trying to do God's will and trying to be helpful to others, again, God comes in and changes my heart and changes my values so that I don't think the same thing. I don't value the same thing. And page 162, at the top, they're talking about a hospital where a lot of them recovered. And they say, many of us have felt for the first time the presence and power of God within its walls. We are greatly indebted to the doctor in attendance there. I believe it's Dr. Silkworth. For he, although it might prejudice his own work, has told us of his belief in ours. Look at Dr. Silkworth, honesty and self-sacrifice. And he says this doctor suggests our approach to some of his patients. He can do this with an eye to selecting those who are willing and able to recover on a spiritual basis, because this is a spiritual program, right? And that's the basis on which we recover. And they say, it's so beautiful. They say, someday we hope every alcoholic will find a fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous at his destination. Well, that hope of theirs has been fulfilled, right? There are AA meetings, OA meetings all over the planet. Isn't that beautiful? And they say, when we travel, we go to these meetings. This practice enables us to lend a helping hand, at the same time avoiding certain alluring distractions on the road. So they're saying, when we travel, it's easy to go off plan. So if we need to travel for any reason, that's a time we really need to work with our sponsors, and make sure that we have a plan for recovery. Top of 163, they say, you may be but one man, one woman with this book in your hand. We believe and hope it contains all you need to know. And they say, we know what you're thinking. You're saying, I'm jittery and alone. I certainly couldn't do that, but you can. You forget that you have just now tapped a source of power, like an oil well, right? That never runs dry, a source of power much greater than yourself. To duplicate with such backing what we've accomplished is only a matter of willingness, patience, and labor. Willing to do the work. Patience, because, selfish hearts and sick minds and bodies don't change overnight. Sometimes they kind of do. And labor, this is work. And they say, okay, so continuing on page 164, they say, so many of us have discovered the joy of helping others. And they say, once we do, there's no stopping until everyone in that town has had his opportunity to recover if he can and will. So again, we should ask ourselves, am I getting involved in my local fellowship to make sure that everyone in my town has an opportunity to hear this message? And they say, okay, you may say, but I don't have the benefit of contact with those who wrote this book. And I say, well, we don't know. God will determine that. So remember, your real reliance is always upon Him. He will show you how to create the fellowship you crave. So it is a normal craving within us. This is not a program where we're supposed to get rid of all our desires and be alone with God. We're not supposed to have demands, but we certainly can have desires. And to crave a fellowship is a healthy desire. And they say our book is meant to be suggestive only. We realize we know only a little. I don't agree with that. I think they knew quite a lot. God will constantly disclose more to you and to us. Ask him in your morning meditation what you can do each day for the man who is still sick. When I meditate in the morning, I say, God, I pray for knowledge of your will for me for today and the power to carry it out. And how can I help the still suffering compulsive eater? And then I set a timer for 12 minutes and I listen to see if God's got anything he wants to tell me. It says the answers will come if your own house is in order. So again, we can't meditate and ask for knowledge of God's will while we're cheating on our husband and cheating on our taxes. We have to keep our own house in order. It says, obviously, you cannot transmit something you haven't got. But the converse is we can transmit something we have got. Transmit, like electricity is transmitted, energy going from one source to another. We can transmit that. How? See to it that your relationship with God is right. Submit to God, clear away the wreckage of your past, help others. And great events will come to pass for you and countless others. This is the great fact for us. They're saying this is just a fact, right? That great events will come to pass for you and countless others if you abandon yourself to God. And then let's basically give God a blank check. They close by saying, abandon yourself to God as you understand God. God, take my life and do with it whatever you want. Admit your faults to him and to your fellows, not just to God, but to other people. That's how we grow in humility. Clear away the wreckage of your past. And once we've done that, we continue to clear away the wreckage of each day. Give freely of what you found. We never take money for this, and join us. And they promise, we shall be with you in the fellowship of the Spirit, and you will surely meet some of us as you trudge the road of happy destiny. Isn't it great? Like some of us are in different countries and everything, but they say we'll meet. So as some of you know, I won't be here next week. I am Saturday flying to South Florida, Sunday catching a boat and going on a cruise. And my sponsee Kinga, who lives in the UK, who I've never met, mentioned that she was going to be in a conference in Miami and she was flying down early this weekend. So I will be in Florida in there before I board the boat, less than 24 hours. At the same time, she will be there. So this Saturday, we are going to be, no, this Sunday morning, we are going to be having breakfast together. You will surely meet some of us as you trudge the road to happy destiny. And they end with a prayer. May God bless you and keep you until then. And with that, I will pass.